Hello and welcome to week 2 of the psychology of adulthood, and I hope you had a really good first week in class. I mean, the discussion boards are blowing up all over the place, and that's really great. Lots of diversity in this class. That's incredible. Really enjoyed the first week, and I'm looking forward to, as I'm developing this class, I get excited each time I'm doing material. I'm working on next week's stuff right now, and it's going to be really kind of cool how we explore entering into adulthood. But for this week, it's kind of a exactly defining what is the nature of the shoulders upon which we are standing in order to see. And those shoulders of giants are these theories that are out there that have to do with adult development that you will find sprinkled across the rest of the course. These are theories that I've attached to and learned about that I feel are important in our discussions about adult development, and they inform us about that developmental perspective of things that are going on as we encounter the challenges of adulthood. So if you take a look at Brightspace here, you'll see in the course timeline, we've gotten through week 1, great work on that, and here we are in week 2, conceptual models. This is my term for the underpinning foundations of what we're going to be doing in terms of this class. There's a discussion and a quiz associated with this, and we find that material right here in chapter 2. So if I go to chapter 2, here we have a link to the actual file, and here's the discussion and the quiz. So if I click on this file, there's my course book. So let's make our way through this rather quickly here. I know you can read, so just kind of go over this a little bit. So here we have lots of theories, and what do theories mean? I go into, what does it mean to have a theory? Where does this come from? Research, when you're the scientific method providing a discipline for scientists to collect and analyze data and come up with theories that explain the relationships between variables. And these theories get tested over and over. And there's no theory in this chapter that hasn't been put through that ringer several hundred times. And if a theory can be put through that ringer, it can be examined, critiqued, it could be crushed, smushed up, spread out, chopped up, whatever they do to theories, and still come out at the end with some useful information, it's probably pretty close to truth. The thing is with social sciences is the truth, well, as I like to say, if somebody asks me, what would happen if Bob had this happen to him, and my first psychological answer would be, it kind of depends on a lot of things. And each one of those things are factors that play into how and why we behave the way that we do. And here's a collection of ideas that explain parts of our human development, and they're useful to us to the degree that they've lasted so long in the collection of literature here in the field of psychology. So we make our way through there. We have, here's the theories that we're going to be, learning outcomes, and we enter into my sort of soliloquy here about why it's difficult to just have one grand defying theory of human behavior. We need a lot of different ones because we're difficult to nail down. So the first one I introduced to you is Erikson, and certainly the colorful character of Erikson as a former student of Freud has always been a fascination to me. His own life was a search for identity. It's not surprising that he came up with a theory of identity development that departed from the early work of Freud, because Erikson really felt that the human development continues through the lifespan, where Freud thought it sort of ended in young adulthood and we're pretty much just coasting the rest of the way. You and I know intuitively there's enough people here in this class, really, that are continuing to develop. They've come back to school, they're changing jobs and all that. Of course we keep developing into adulthood, and that's why we can have a class like this. This is not how do we coast to retirement. This is adult development and the changes, dynamic way in which we change over time. So Erikson has given us a model of tasks that we have to accomplish as our changing psyche engages with the social demands of our society. So he coined the term psychosocial. And he presents us with a number of stages exemplified in that nice little graphic I stole from the internet. And here we have the first stage, trust versus mistrust, second, early childhood autonomy, then to preschool initiative, school age, industry, adolescence, about kind of shaping the identity. And then we're going to be talking, we're going to mention, in the next chapter, I'm going to talk a little bit about those first four leading up to identity, which is then into the advent of young adulthood. And actually, next week, we're going to be in chapter 4, we're going to be looking at emerging adulthood. So we're going to talk about the transition time, moving from adolescence and where identity is there, into young adulthood that Erickson said was about intimacy, but now there's a new stage in the middle called emerging adulthood that's going to be getting its whole own chapter in this course. You won't find that very many places. And we're going to get that an emerging in between there, where we might have 1 foot in adolescence and 1 foot in adulthood for a period of time. And that can last a really long time before we kind of move on. And you'll see that intimacy is involved in there, and identity is involved all the time. So we don't finish identity in adolescence. We build the bricks around the foundation for it, and then we spend the rest of our lives building our identity from that point. So don't get too stuck on the terms too much. Then we're going to go into intimacy and relationships and stuff like that, and then generativity versus stagnation, and then finally into maturity, ego integrity versus despair. We're going to this is the first theory that we're going to be kind of examining here throughout. And here I rip this right off the internet. It's actually some pretty good descriptions of each one of those stages, and I spent a little bit of time doing that in the text, in the course book. And then enter in Marcia, James Marcia, Canadian psychologist. I'm Canadian, so I like to point out when my great compatriots are doing good stuff. And he was a fan of Erickson as well. And his work plays a very large role in my own work, which is a theory of human development that I call puzzle pieces, which is a constructivist theory of how we build our identity in the same way that we would build a jigsaw puzzle. I'll get into that whole theory. There's a whole chapter dedicated to that, and that's my work. But it really borrows from Marcia, that if we look at each piece of our identity as the analogy I use as a jigsaw puzzle, is that as we're shaping that particular piece of who we are, we undergo 2 processes. One is crisis, which is looking at the options, and commitment is we select the option. And the degree to which we do either one of those is exemplified in this chart right here. The degree to which we have completed crisis and or completed commitment, it puts each one of those pieces at any given moment in time, it puts them into one of these squares. Either identity foreclosure, meaning I've committed, but I really never looked at the options. Identity moratorium, I'm not committed, but I'm currently exploring the options. Diffusion, I'm neither exploring nor committing, sort of a back burner thing. Or identity achievement, I have looked at the options and I've selected one. So we can take all those pieces of our puzzle, that's how I used it in my theory, take all these pieces and they're all at different statuses. So right now, your gender identity might be foreclosed, or maybe you went through some exploring of the options and it's now achieved. You have an achieved identity because you actually went through that process of exploring different options. At one point, you were a pre-college student looking at your college identity, and maybe you looked at USM, maybe you looked at KVCC, maybe you looked at whatever, and you chose to be a UMA student. And so now your status is I'm a UMA student, and you looked at the options, and now that's achieved identity. But maybe you're a senior and you're thinking about going to graduate school right now, but you're still entertaining. Do I want to go to Orono, USM? Do I want to go out of state, do something online? And you're kind of actively looking at that. Your current graduate school student identity, that piece would be in identity moratorium. You're looking, but you haven't checked any. Now let's think, some of you, all of you, are going to have to live somewhere where you retire. You might, but right now, you're not really thinking about that. You're thinking about, what's getting through this class, getting through your degree and stuff like that. Haven't really put a lot of thought into where you're going to think when you retire. You haven't looked around. You haven't certainly made any commitments. That your where am I going to live when I retire identity is diffusion. You're not working on it at this point. So it's a theory that kind of looks at Erickson's and says, as we're defining aspects of our personality and our theory, what processes, decision-making processes do we go through to arrive at our conclusions? Great and very useful theory here. Then we go into cognitive development and the introduced to Piaget. I hope you enjoy the pictures of these theorists that try to catch them, pick pictures that are sort of showing a little bit of their personality. Throughout the lifespan, we do engage in Piaget's processes of assimilation and accommodation. If you've taken any developmental psych classes at all, you have probably come across Piaget's cognitive theory. Assimilation is the process by which we take information and incorporate it into our internal schemas, which are another word for concepts, or the totality of something we know about something. And as we experience new information, we assimilate it, but at the same time change existing information to accommodate for new information coming in. So as we learn new things about an individual, we can change our preconceptions about them and thus accommodate for that new information. So assimilation and accommodation are processes that we go through our lifespan. In his developmental theory, what we see is he came up with stages here, exemplified in this particular graphic. We're not going to cover these. We're really just going to look at the last two. So sensory motor stage in the first 2 years of life, pre-operational stage, but then we go into concrete operational and formal operational thinking, and we'll use these terms to describe the levels of thinking that we as adults can use to problem solve. Now, most of the time, we don't need formal operational thinking, the abstract reasoning and stuff like that, but sometimes life calls upon us to use those abstract reasoning skills. Most of the time, we can get away with concrete operational thinking and understanding things at the way that we experience them. So these terms will come up when we talk about the different stages of adult development. So our next theory, we look at intelligence here, a couple theories about intelligence. The first is from Robert Sternberg. And there's Bob there. This is just a little side note. I went to a Association of American Colleges and Universities conference in Boston, and Dr. Sternberg was the keynote speaker, and I got to meet him and shake his hand, and I was nervous as hell. And it was really neat. He's a really, really nice and very friendly and funny person. His keynote was hilarious. He was just really, really, really cool guy. And but he came up with a theory that he called the triarchic theory of intelligence, that how do we use our intelligence? And there's componential intelligence, which is kind of like a standard IQ, doing good school stuff. There's experiential intelligence, that's our capability to be creative and flexible. And then there's contextual. or practical intelligence in the I didn't put it in bold, but practical is sort of the context in which the problem solving that occurs, or the knowledge base that's specific to a particular culture or situation that you're in. So an individual that's really good at school and really good at writing papers, when challenged with writing papers, that's easy. But if you're me, I'm pretty good at writing papers, but I'm really bad at changing the carburetor out of my car. That is a practical intelligence that I don't have, and I'm not good at that, and I would probably mess it up if I tried it. So it kind of puts value on the different ways in which we learn and apply our intelligence, and it really gives a nod to contextual knowledge, like knowing how to, say, survive in the woods, or knowing how to negotiate the subway, or negotiate anything, to travel abroad, to have different languages and be able to understand the customs of different countries. Each one of those, it's separate from the other kind of smarts that we have. Now, the next theory that we get into, an equally impressive individual, is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. And as a contrast to Sternberg's idea, this looks at types of intelligence and the degree to which we have these, and we may have strengths associated with these, and they define kind of who we are. And you could probably go through each one of these and understand where you might be high or low. These are not intelligence tests that are just done with a test. They're really they're not intelligent theories that are done with a simple test. They're really different than that. So if we look at the different kinds of intelligence, just as you go around these different intelligence, think about what you're good at, what you find easy, and what you find comfortable doing. Are you good at visualizing the world of spaces? You kind of like understand directions and where things are? Are you a naturalist? You really get a sense of the interconnectedness of things. Are you a good musician, or good identifying tones? Do you have logical, mathematical abilities? Are you very good at deep philosophy and deep thinking and existential sort of thinking? What about interpersonal relationships? You're really good at talking and understanding people's emotions and whatnot. Body kinesthetic, you're a good athlete, good dancer. Some musicianship, in terms of dexterity. Linguistic, you're very good with words, you read a lot, those kind of things. And intrapersonal, very insightful as to your in inner workings. And so you can see, and the really cool thing about Gardner's theory is he validates all these as intelligences. So that great dancer has a great body kinesthetic intelligence, and that's cool. Then you got the artist, maybe the spatial one is sort of like, are you a photographer who, no matter what, your pictures never look really professional? And then you have someone, doesn't matter the quality of their camera, they take pictures and it looks like it could be blown up in a poster and sold in a store. It's like just perfect. It's sort of that spatial ability for artistic sort of expression. It's something they're good at. It's an intelligence. So this is really, really sort of validating theory. Okay, then we go into a kind of one plays an interesting role in adult development, and that is Yuri Bronfenbrenner's theory of ecological development. And I picked this picture for him because there was a couple of them. He had like a photo shoot out in the woods or something like that. And boy, doesn't it look like just the average high school graduation photo, leaning against the tree. But he's a wonderful human being, has passed away, but he developed this system here. And what it really entails is, sort of as we grow older, we move away from our individual to family to larger and larger concentric circles of interaction with society around us. So we become more aware of those things and they impact us. It's also, and this is probably one of the more important aspects of this particular theory, if we look at the arrows, they show interconnections between the systems. In fact, we have even a mesosystem, which is nothing but interconnections between the exosystem and the microsystem. These are the interactions that occur between those systems that impact us. So let's just say, for example, we look at the macro system, the attitudes and ideologies of the culture that we live in, and we think about, something like maybe Black Lives Matter, and, how does that affect us? And then we have to think, well, you can see the attitudes and ideologies interact with mass media, with our neighbors and their opinions on things, social services, industry, and local politics. And those interact with our mesosystem, which connects it to our family, religious institutions, and whatnot. So there's no escape. You have these other things on the outside, and because they interact with the inner circles all the way down, those are the way those external things can impact us. So say, for example, we have a Black Lives Matter going on, and our neighbors have feelings about that, and our neighbors they go to the same church we have, or we run into them at our health services, or their kids go to the same school, and then we have this experience of differing points of view, let's say, on that particular issue that come home to roost. So your child comes home from school and says, Timmy's dad said this about this national thing going on, and we see how those connections throughout our society impact our experiences. So, important part there. Now, the next one, Looking Glass Self, is probably one of my favorite theories of all to talk about. I talk about it in almost every single class that I teach. And essentially what it is it's the they. If you think about the concept of what will they think, if you ask that question. And many of us like to preserve the notion that, I'm not that influenced by things around me. I'm my own person. I have my own drummer, kind of thing. But the truth is we are largely shaped by the people around us. And Looking Glass Self essentially formulates a theory that there is a set of people, and we'll define that next, but there's a set of people to which, and we will select individuals sometimes, or sometimes we look at the whole committee, and we look in the mirror. That's the looking glass. Look in the mirror and we see what we see, every aspect of who we are, and we imagine how that person would see us. And from that, we formulate judgments about our own behavior. So this is role models. Think about role models being on there. I admire this person. I want to be like them in more ways. So I look at myself and I think, well, what would this admired person say about that? And maybe I need to adjust my behavior in accordance to that. We do this willfully. Of course, there are members on our committee who maybe we don't like them being on the committee. They're uncomfortable. They challenge us, maybe in a positive way. But there might be individuals on our committee, like abusive individuals or exes or whatnot, that seem to continue to have a hold on our personalities and how we feel about ourselves and how we manage that committee, who we put on that committee, I feel is a significant developmental process that happens during adulthood, and it doesn't necessarily happen early in adulthood. It could happen any time. But we are highly, I think over time, we become more selective as to who's on there. Some of them die off. Not that that changes things necessarily, but some of them die off and they're no longer a part. When I leave work, then my relationship with my boss is going to change. I don't necessarily have to impress him anymore. Those kinds of things. But over time, we begin to actively manage our Looking Glass Self committee. And so we'll be talking about that relatively soon in the course here. That'll come up. Then we go into, there's the Looking Glass Self example there. And that brings us to, I thought there was another one, but here we are. We're at the end of the chapters. And here we have the first discussion, chapter 2 discussion, is I want you to look at the theory that you are the least familiar with and in line with the goals of psychology. The goals of psychology are to describe, explain, predict, and control human behavior. So I want you to take on the first three. I want you to look at the theory, and I want you to actively think about how that theory describes, explains, and predicts some aspect of you right now. So it could be any one of those theories, Piaget, or how you assimilate and accommodate information to the expertise that you have right now, and the what stage you are in Erickson's theory, and how does that define you in terms of. So you're gonna have to do some. You might have to do more than the reading that's in the course book. I mean, I've covered theories that books have been written on, so just summarize these things. So feel free to, really do the exploration beyond the material in the class and get some information on these theories and show me how you can apply those theories to describe yourself. And finally, in chapter 2, I take aim at Looking Glass Self and Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. So I'm asking you to describe two members. These are people with names. Really, they are people with names. You don't have to tell me their names, but you might say, well, my father continues to be a really positive aspect of my identity. I really admire him, et cetera, et cetera. And a negative person. If you're current, you think about those individuals in your life that are currently influencing. There's that table over there with the committee, and they're currently influencing you. There's some bad ones and some good ones. I want you to describe one that's positive and one that's negative. The second part is a little bit of self-expression, being able to identify, go around that circle of intelligences. You don't have to describe all of them. I want you to describe the ones you're really good at. So like, I'm excellent at interpersonal communications. I have deep friendships. I have very good at conversing. I'm outgoing. And you might just focus on that one area as your characteristic of your personality. What we're basically looking is the application of theory. We take theory, take these understandings, these explanations of human behavior, and we say, okay, this is how it applies to me. This is how I see this theory playing out in my real world life. And it kind of gives you new names, a new language, a more scientific language to talk about your everyday experience. So that's this week. We're going to be doing this. Look forward to next week. We're going to start talking about the transitions into adulthood and going into that new stage of development, maybe adding another stage to Erickson's theory. So I look forward to seeing you in the discussion boards, and have a great week.